So we will start the Association of Otolaryngologists Chennai branch proceedings. So initially, this year has already been a very bad year for all of us in the globe. So we have been trying to conduct several academic meetings, but in spite of the pandemic, we are trying to hold the general body meeting virtually. And I thought probably it will be better if we have a good speaker to highlight some topic which has not generally been discussed. So that is the reason why I chose this topic, and I chose somebody who was an expert in that. And that is how Professor Sivakumar had come in. He was roped in by Dr. A.P. Samandam. So he only gave me the number and asked me to contact him. So Dr. Sivakumar had very well accepted my invite. So thank you, Dr. Sivakumar.
Thank you, sir.
So to start with, we will start with the report by Dr. Semana Selvan, who is the secretary of the association. So he will be giving the association's proceedings for the past year. It is not past year, it's nearly 1.5 years. We were supposed to conduct the meeting in May, but unfortunately, because of the pandemic at its height, probably it was in its upswing. But we had a lot of problem during that time because treatment was not proper. Nowadays, we know what we have to do for this particular disease. So we were not able to conduct the meetings. All were in a survival mode. So we had to, help ourselves. And as a result, we didn't want to gather. And so meetings were postponed. We couldn't do live meetings also because there were umpteen number of live meetings. And literally we were pounded with so many virtual meetings. And even today, I think there are a lot of meetings going on. So I invite Professor Semana Selvan to give the annual report, Secretary's report for this particular year. Semana Selvan, you can proceed.
I thank all the members of the association who have joined today and who have also voted us. Only Vijay Vikram, the treasurer, was unopposed. So he gives continuity to the team. He is taking care of the income tax auditing and other effectively. The hallmark of our this 1.5 years is that the flat which was vacant, we could rent it out. And the amount which we had has increased in our bank account. And we are also doing so many things like paying the backlog of our property tax and other things for that flat. And every meeting we used to conduct, mostly it was in ENT auditorium at Madras Medical College. So I have to thank the director, Professor Muthukumar sir, for giving this, that auditorium. And many of our meetings were conducted in Radisson Blu. 3 meetings were conducted at Radisson Blu, which was also enjoyable. The meetings we conducted at Madras Medical College, senior professors, they used to climb 2 floors because there was no lift in that British era building. Professor KKR sir, Professor Majumdar sir, he used to travel all the way from Pondicherry, Professor TG Manikam sir, Professor AP Sambandam sir, and also every meeting, Professor Prasanna Kumar sir's unit from SRMC used to put a case. Most probably it will be related to the tracheal stenosis, his series of cases. And the most important thing which happened was the lecture by Michael Stroop at Radisson Blu for our association. And moreover, he used me as the test model. That was the thing. He dropped me 55 degrees from the flat to the down. All my purse, cell phone, everything fell down. We used to keep only 30 degree tilt. He used to give 55 degree tilt. And that was, to be blessed by him was a great experience for me. And we have to thank the sponsors, Sun Pharma, Abbott, and also Hearing Care Center, Adair for hosting that Radisson Blu meetings. And membership drive has also been slowly and steadily picking up. Many have joined, they have paid their fees. Temporary membership and permanent membership, everything is going on very well. But to be on the sadder thing, these many ENT professors and others have died. Professor Karnagaran sir, Dr. Shyam Sundar sir, Dr. Bhaskaran sir, either due to COVID or non-COVID reasons. So we miss them more. So that is the thing. We have an employee called Anbalahan who has been helping us temporary ad hoc basis. So we have not paid him any money so far after that COVID. So, sir, I request you to permit us to pay at least 2,000 rupees.
Definitely.
Puja bonus for him, sir.
Definitely, we'll do that.
Yes, sir. And it has been a pleasure to work with Professor M. N. Shankar, sir. He takes minute care of details. He even had a test done with the speaker and the moderator 2 days back. So he takes care of everything, including sponsorship, everything. So it has been a cakewalk for us, for me as well as Vikram. We have learned a lot from you, sir. Your stoicism, your stamina, everything we have to learn. And about the speaker, sir, we as ENT surgeons, we are often doing thyroidectomy, tracheal resection and anastomosis separately, but not together. Probably today you will be showing them together. Yeah. So that will be the most important thing we learned today from you, sir. And also I thank the moderator, Dr. Vijay Krishnan, sir, for helping us out. He has done great things for our association.
Yeah, very much so, because yes. I think he is the one who is leading the show, not yes. only as a host, but also directing how to proceed with this session. Yes. He is associated with MA for a very long time. He is associated with Professor Mohan Kameshwaran for a long time. And his wife is also there, and that adds not only as a pillar, but also great strength to his academic endeavors. He has also been a great host and also an expert in India with regards to sleep studies and sleep apnea syndrome. So I think a lot of people are looking out to him for sleep related problems. So I thank Dr. Vijay Krishnan also.
So most of the ENT surgeons are having sleep disorders now because of COVID. I asked him whether I can use melatonin for my sleep problem. He said, okay, go ahead there.
That's great.
Thank you for your kind words.
No problem. So thank you, Dr. Semana Selvan. I hope that a lot of people join. Too early also. I think most of the time they'll be waiting only for the speaker, not for us to speak. So I'm just trying to push in the time so that we can...
Sir, many have joined the website, sir. They are watching live in the website.
Oh, in the website. Okay. Thank you for reminding.
Many are waiting there.
Yeah, okay. So I think I'll have to speak a little bit about the association also. So respected senior members, professors, assistant professors, and ENT surgeons, welcome to our online meet. I just wanted an auspicious opening. Many were telling why you chose this particular day. I chose this particular day just to be a bit more auspicious because of the fact that we have been in pandemic times, very distraught times, very difficult times. I know there were a lot of people who were in the survival mode, like tomorrow will I be there? That was the state. So we are probably crossing the storm. So I hope that everything becomes all right. And so I just wanted this association also to cherish its old memories and go in a great footing. So I just wanted an auspicious opening for the meet. The livelihood of all sections of the society has been thrown to the streets by a small virus. It just shows how deceptive our lives are. I know that during the peak of pandemic, people just wanted to exist. That is all. This shows how vulnerable we are. Our association has been promoting academic values since its inception. And ever since I took over in 2019 as the president, I've endeavored to do my best for the association. For the first time, we introduced an international speaker in the form of Professor Stroop, who spoke about vertigo. The monthly meetings of academics was in progress until March, when the government insisted to close down all meets, and so we had to follow. The GBM, which used to be held every May, was not possible due to the pandemic, and I found an early date as soon as the government had announced relaxation, and that is why I chose this month. On this occasion, I have the pleasure of introducing an accomplished head and neck surgeon from Tata Memorial Hospital, Mumbai, to our association. He is Dr. Shivakumar, an associate professor of head and neck surgery. He will talk to us regarding tracheal resection during thyroidectomy. Professor Shivakumar studied in Kempe Gowda College, Medical College in Bangalore, and then did his post-graduation in Armed Forces Medical College in Bangalore. He has served many centers in, and he is a life member of the Foundation of Head and Neck Oncology in India. He specialized in head and neck surgery and oncology, skull-base surgery from Kidwai Memorial Hospital in Bangalore. Then he has had a stint in Malabar Institute of Medical Sciences. Then he has had a stint in our own state in Mahatma Gandhi Medical College, along with Professor Sambandam, who had probably inspired a lot, I suppose. And he has specialized in head and neck surgery and oncology, skull-base surgery, and additional experience in microvascular reconstructive surgery and translational surgery research. Has done many publications, including 30 publications in international journal and 24 publications in international journals, and has written 2 chapters in textbooks. He is also a life member of Kerala Association of Surgical Oncologists. He is a life member of the Indian Society of Otology, life member of the Association of Otolaryngologists of India, Karnataka chapter and Bangalore branch, and he's also a life member of AOE South Zone. So he has had many accomplishments, and going to Tata Memorial is itself a great thing. So I invite Professor Shivakumar Tyagarajan to give us a lecture. We will be pleased to hear you, sir.
Thank you for the kind words, sir. And I would, at the outset, wish everybody a happy Vijay Dashmi. And I would like to thank AOI Chennai for having me for this and making me give a talk. So I'll straight away go to the talk. I'll share the screen.
Just a minute. The moderator of this session will be Professor Vijay Krishnan. He is from MURF, Chennai. He is a pioneering surgeon, especially in sleep apnea syndromes. So I chose him because of his, he is one of the key figures here in Chennai. Thank you. Over to you, Shivakumar.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So good morning once again. And we had discussed that we will be talking about tracheal resection. But basically, tracheal resection means it's a locally advanced thyroid cancer. So I slightly tweaked the topic, and I just put it as management of locally advanced thyroid cancer, because thyroid cancer not just involves trachea in isolation, it involves surrounding structures. So to make it wholesome, I just thought we'll talk about locally advanced thyroid cancer, of which tracheal invasion is a very common aspect, and see how to deal with each and every aspect of locally advanced thyroid cancer. So just to begin with, I just thought I'll give you an overall perspective as to how common are thyroid cancers. And in India, we all know breast cancer nowadays is the #1 cancer, followed by oral cancer. Oral cancer was the cancer which is more common. Breast cancer slightly overtaken it in the last couple of years. And now you can see that thyroid cancer ranks 19. If you look at the global data, which is given for world over, there's an Indian fact sheet as well, which suggests that the thyroid cancer in India ranks the 19. So that means to say we have quite a good number of thyroid cancer patients in our hands whom we need to treat. So to begin with, we all know that thyroid cancer is the most common endocrine malignancy that we come across. And majority of the patients majority of the patients with thyroid cancer, especially the differentiated thyroid cancer, let me tell you what differentiated thyroid cancer in just a while, present with limited locoregional disease with excellent long-term outcomes. We all know that differentiated thyroid cancer have excellent 10-year and 20-year survival, up to in upwards of 95%, sometimes 99%, the early stage cancers. So what are differentiated thyroid cancer? Now, so the papillary thyroid carcinoma, we all know that the papillary thyroid carcinoma, follicular thyroid carcinoma, these are all the types of thyroid carcinoma, Hürthle cell thyroid carcinoma. These three put together make the differentiated thyroid cancer. We also know that the papillary thyroid carcinoma forms about 85% of all the thyroid cancers, and the follicular carcinoma forms about 5 to 10%, Hürthle cell about 1%. The remaining 5% is formed by the medullary carcinoma. Anaplastic thyroid carcinoma forms less than 1%, and the others, it could be lymphoma or metastasis from other organs and things like that. So differentiated thyroid cancer means papillary thyroid carcinoma, follicular thyroid carcinoma, and Hürthle cell thyroid carcinoma put together is termed as differentiated thyroid cancer. Why they are called differentiated thyroid cancer is that they all have the follicular cells which are much differentiated in appearance when you look at it under the microscope, and they take up thyroglobulin that much better compared to any of the other varieties. So they sort of have a good survival as compared to the medullary, anaplastic, or other forms. So having that in mind, henceforth, I'll be referring to differentiated thyroid carcinoma, which means all these three together. And among the three, the papillary thyroid carcinoma is the most common. We all know that. So what do we mean by locally advanced thyroid cancer? That means when the disease goes beyond the thyroid, when that is extrathyroidal extension from the primary carcinoma from within the thyroid, or we also know that the thyroid carcinoma has tends to have metastasis to the lymph nodes. So when there is an extracapsular, when the metastatic disease also comes out of the capsule, that is one of the extracapsular extension from the involved lymph nodes into the surrounding structures. When we encounter one or both of these, it is known as locally advanced thyroid cancer. And it involves structures in close proximity. And we'll just see in the next slide as to what are the structures that it involves and what is the frequency of its involvement. And 10 to 15% of differentiated thyroid cancer present as locally advanced thyroid cancer. So that's quite a significant proportion of patients who present with us, and it's a challenging clinical situation for the treating surgeon as well, because there are a lot of important structures that are involved that needs to be saved. And given the fact that even locally advanced thyroid cancer patients do have a good survival, so if we do something that may increase the morbidity, the patient is going to live with this morbidity and he's going to come back to you with the morbidity, and the patient is going to feel is going to be it's not going to do well, and the surgeon has to keep making an attempt to make the patient's life better, which is going to be very difficult. Now let's see, there are a lot of structures in and around. We all know the trachea, esophagus, the great vessels, the strap muscles, and the recurrent laryngeal nerve. So the most common structure that is involved obviously is the strap muscles. That's 53% of the time. That is followed by the recurrent laryngeal nerve. Up to 47% of the time, the recurrent laryngeal nerve is involved by the invasive cancer. Then the third is in the list is the trachea, and then followed by the great vessels, which is both the internal jugular vein is more common and the internal carotid artery is lesser common, and it's 30% of the time. Now, one needs to understand that most of the time when it's a differentiated thyroid cancer, it doesn't involve the internal jugular vein so much so that you have to sacrifice the internal jugular vein. And of course, there's no question of sacrificing the internal carotid artery. We generally don't sacrifice. We tend to shave off from the internal carotid artery as much as possible. But if you have to sacrifice, you could do that, but with all proper preoperative workup and all precautions. And then the esophagus subsequently in 21% of the time. And then last but not the least, the larynx. It's also involved in 12% of the time, but there won't be a situation where you will have to do a total laryngectomy for a differentiated thyroid cancer. So most of the time, very, very rarely would you end up doing a laryngectomy. All that you will probably end up doing is a partial laryngectomy or a shave off from the larynx. So the situation where you'll have to do a total laryngectomy in a differentiated thyroid cancer would be very minuscule, so to say. Now, tumor histology. Now, that is what determines the surgical decision in locally advanced thyroid cancer. Now, if it is differentiated thyroid cancer, we would definitely embark into going ahead with an aggressive surgery as much as possible to get out the disease. But let's say if it is a medullary thyroid carcinoma or anaplastic thyroid carcinoma, if it is an anaplastic thyroid carcinoma, definitely surgery may not be the option, because you have to see what are the structures that are involved, and the survival from anaplastic thyroid carcinoma is very, very poor till date. And medullary thyroid carcinoma, again, it depends on whether the patient has distant metastasis and how much of the locoregional structures it involves. But for differentiated thyroid cancer, you can go ahead with surgery even in the presence of distant metastasis, because even in the presence of distant metastasis, the 5-year survival after complete surgical removal and followed by adjuvant therapy, which is in the form of radioactive iodine therapy with or without external beam radiotherapy, is up to 65%. You can imagine. So for differentiated thyroid cancer, even in the presence of locally advanced thyroid cancer, where you have to shave off disease, and also in the presence of distant metastasis, the most common site being to the lung, the 5-year survival is pretty encouraging. And so most of the time in locally advanced thyroid cancer, the locoregional disease contributes to the morbidity and mortality rather than the distant metastasis. So that is another premise why we go ahead with surgery even in the presence of distant metastasis, because these patients will live on for up to 5 years, and they will not die because of the distant metastasis, but they will die because of the locoregional morbidity. The disease will invade the trachea, causing stridor and various other problems. It will invade the esophagus, it may invade the vessels, and give rise to a lot of morbidity. And the other important point is that they respond to adjuvant radioactive iodine therapy. So that takes care of the distant metastasis or the microscopic disease that is left behind following the surgery. And so the patients tend to do better. So that is why the 5-year survival is up to 65%, not just because of the surgery. Once the surgery is done and the patient receives radioactive iodine therapy with or without external beam radiotherapy, they tend to have a very good a very good survival. I would say 65% in oncology is a good survival at 5 years, because most of the squamous cell carcinoma, the locoregional advanced thyroid cancers would be staged as stage 3 or 4, mostly 4. So in that case, any stage 4 squamous cell carcinoma will not have a overall survival of close to even 50%. So there are certain principles of a surgical excision in locoregionally advanced thyroid cancer, which one needs to keep in mind as you embark to do this surgery. That is removal of all gross tumor. You can resect structures which can be done safely without giving rise to a lot of morbidity, because you need to keep in mind that these patients will live for quite a good number of years. So the morbidity given during surgery will live with them and give rise to a lot of problems. And preservation of functioning and vital structures as whenever possible, because you again need to keep in mind that you have an adjuvant therapy that is in hand, which will help you mop up the microscopic disease. Now, this should not be the reason to do an R plus resection, meaning to say you shouldn't leave behind gross disease and hope that the radioactive iodine will take care of the gross disease. That is not the that should not be the premise. After doing a complete resection, when you do an R1, that is microscopic disease is left behind. That happens when you shave off disease. That can be taken care of by radioactive iodine therapy, not macroscopic disease. Please keep that in mind. And appropriate use of adjuvant therapy. So these are the 3 main goals that needs to be kept in mind when you're going ahead with a surgery for locally advanced thyroid cancer. So you might be surprised that most of the patients may be asymptomatic to present with. All they may present to you with maybe a thyroid swelling that somebody has noticed. And when you work up, you might find something like this, which probably is invading the trachea. The cord is fixed, and probably over the time of over period of months or whatever, the opposite cord is compensated and the voice apparently looks normal. So that's another reason why you have to do an examination of the vocal cords to document that as well. So they may present with hoarseness if they are symptomatic, cough, stridor, hemoptysis, dysphagia, or a hard neck mass, like you can see in this picture. It's in a case of an anaplastic thyroid carcinoma, where it's also showing a tracheal infiltration. Now, investigation that you do is, of course, an FI needle, FNA. In thyroid, usually you wouldn't want to do a core biopsy, but you can do it in some case like this, where the mass is up and jetting out and it's away from important structures. But it is better done with ultrasound guidance, because what happens is when there is such a huge mass, you never know how the mass has pushed the thyroid vessel, whether it is taken the vessel anterior to the mass or it's going posterior to the mass. Most of the time it's posterior, but we have seen occasions where the internal carotid artery has been anterior to the mass as well. So ultrasound guided true cut biopsy may be advisable in situations where it is necessary, not always. A fine needle biopsy to establish a diagnosis may be good. When you sometimes anaplastic thyroid carcinoma will have to be differentiated from a lymphoma. Hodgkin's lymphoma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is most common in the thyroid. And for that, you might require a true cut biopsy to, differentiate as to what subtype it is. Usually the large B cell, diffuse B cell non-Hodgkin lymphoma is the common variety. So in that case, they respond absolutely brilliantly to chemotherapy. It just melts. So a few lucky patients whom we thought is anaplastic could be actually, a diffuse B large cell lymphoma. So, and they do really well to chemotherapy. So in such cases, you may end up doing a core biopsy, but predominantly it's an FNAC. A CT scan is done of the head and neck region and maybe the thorax, because mediastinal lymph nodes is commonly seen. MRI can be done when you suspect an esophageal involvement. The next thing is fiber optic laryngoscopy and bronchoscopy to document the status of the vocal cords, and also to, if a tracheal invasion is suspected, then to see whether what is the type of what grade of tracheal invasion and how many segments of the ring is involved, And an upper GI endoscopy also could be done to see if there is any growth within the esophagus. So sometimes what we end up doing is in locally advanced, when the trachea is involved, it's not involved in isolation. It also invades the esophagus. We will see in the case that we will be, the video that you would see in some time, it involves the esophagus as well. So you want to see whether it is involving the mucosa, or whether it's involving only the muscular layer. So sometimes we do an upper GI endoscopy to rule out any interluminal disease, and also we do an endoscopic ultrasound at times to see as to what is whether it's the serosa or the muscularis or the submucosal region which is involved. So that is also done along with the upper GI endoscopy, and a metastatic workup. Like you can see in this picture here, you see the lung nodules here and the metastasis to the liver. This is in the same patient of an anaplastic thyroid carcinoma, which you saw the slide previously of the thyroid, presented with this. So this, so you'll have to do a distant metastasis workup. You may tend to do a PET scan as well. That depends on the case-to-case basis, but a CCT neck and thorax should be good enough for differentiated thyroid cancer. For medullary thyroid cancer and anaplastic or a polydifferentiated thyroid cancer, you can do a PET scan. Now, in a locally advanced thyroid cancer, when you decide that you're going to do a surgical intervention, it's very important that you have a good talk with your anesthetist regarding the airway, because most of the time, the airway is distorted. The cords are mostly involved, and there may be intraluminal growth as well. So you have to discuss with the anesthetist as to what is the size of the endotracheal tube that you would want to use, whether it's a routine endotracheal intubation or would you want to do a fiber optic intubation. So all these things are very important, and tracheostomy should be avoided if at all possible. And if the tracheostomy has to be done, it has to be altered anatomy has to be taken into consideration. And also the surgery that is planned or to be planned needs to be considered. So if you're planning a tracheal resection and you had to do a tracheostomy for stridor, in that particular case, like what happened in our case, which I'll be showing to you in some time, it's better you do a high tracheostomy so that you don't lose out on the number of tracheal rings. Here you see the same patient of the anaplastic thyroid carcinoma where the trachea is deviated laterally, and that's the carotid. So you don't have much time to do anything else but to palpate it with your fingers and go ahead, because this patient just presents to you in emergency, OPD with stridor. And then you have to talk to your anesthetist. Usually the policy here is when the patient comes in stridor, if possible, we intubate and then do the tracheostomy. So in this case, we could intubate with a 6-size tube, and we went ahead and we saw the trachea, but we confirmed with a fiber optic bronchoscopy here, you can see, and the tracheal illumination here to confirm that it is the trachea and nothing else. So we did a tracheostomy for this patient. So this is for a tracheostomy. This is also very important because that improves the whatever remaining quality of life this patient would have subsequently, though the patient with anaplastic thyroid carcinoma does very badly at the end of the day. But then that is in this setting. But even when you're doing a tracheal resection and anastomosis, you need to have a very detailed talk about the extent of, how would you go about the intubation plan for this patient is very, very important to be discussed. Now let's go one by one and discuss the structures that are involved and how you deal with them. So the strap muscles is like you would resect the involved strap muscle. You will see in the video as well as to how we do that. Whenever the strap muscle is involved, you have to resect it. I mean, there's no other option you have. There might be a slight of course, there can be argument of change in voice and all that, but mostly when the strap muscles are involved to this extent, the cord is also involved on that particular side. So there might be concern that the voice might be changed when the cord is not involved, but then for oncological purpose, if it has to be resected, it has to be resected. Now, the next most important thing is the recurrent laryngeal nerve. As you can see here, the nerve is usually engulfed by the tumor. And you'd see, and here the tumor, the nerve just goes through the tumor as it enters the larynx. So you would see the similar picture in the case that you will be seeing in a while. Now we need to know how we are going to manage the recurrent laryngeal nerve. That's very important, especially when you're planning a tracheal resection and anastomosis. Even otherwise it's important, but when you're planning a tracheal resection and anastomosis, it's very, very important, because if both the cords are not saved, then there's no point doing a tracheal resection and anastomosis in that particular patient. So the way you handle the recurrent laryngeal nerve depends on whether there is a pre-op recurrent laryngeal nerve palsy or whether there is the vocal cord function is intact. Now, you need to rule out if there is pre-op paralysis that is present, and in the presence of malignancy, you have to resect the nerve, right? If it is lymphoma and you're doing a thyroidectomy and it turns into lymphoma, you can shave off. This is a very rare situation that you'll be in, that you'll do a thyroidectomy for lymphoma. Very, very rare. You would probably end up doing a thyroidectomy for lymphoma unknowingly rather than knowingly. So once a lymphoma is known, you probably will not do a surgical management. And in a benign disease, definitely you got to save the nerve. Now, if it's an invasive carcinoma, and if the preoperative nerve function is lost, then you have to sacrifice the nerve. There is no question about it. But if the preoperative nerve function is intact, and if the nerve is encased, then you might want to shave off the disease from the nerve if it is a differentiated thyroid cancer. Not in a case of a poorly differentiated thyroid cancer, not in a case of medullary thyroid cancer, and definitely not in anaplastic thyroid cancer. So only in differentiated thyroid cancer, if the preoperative vocal cord function is intact, then you could consider shaving off the nerve. That depends on the case-to-case basis. Now, if you end up sacrificing the nerve, then in a functioning nerve, that is, if the pre-op vocal cord function was intact, then the on-table recurrent laryngeal nerve re-innovation is recommended nowadays whenever it is feasible. So immediate re-innovation should be performed when the recurrent laryngeal nerve is resected during surgery for invasive differentiated thyroid cancer, mind you. So when they re-innovate, the glottic phonatory gap is smaller, or it's absolutely not there, and the maximum phonation time is also much better when compared to when you just resect the nerve and just leave it at that. And of course, thyroplasty is there, but then that is done at a later point. But then if you can re-innovate, that gives the best chance. Immediate re-innovation may not be always possible or achievable due to the stump that may not be available, because many times the disease involves at the entry point into the larynx. So in which case it may not be possible, and also the skill to do a microscopic anastomosis. Now this re-innovation procedure was reported by Miyoshi from Kuma Hospital in Japan. They've done a series of close to 60 to 80 patients. They've used the ansa cervicalis. They've used a stump in between, or just the cut end is the involved end is segment is resected, and then end-to-end anastomosis was also done. And the results they've quoted an encouraging results when the re-innovations are done. So whenever possible, a re-innovation of the recurrent laryngeal nerve should be attempted. And also and many of you, of course, would be using the intraoperative neuromonitoring. So we also use it, and that helps in a large way as to confirm the functioning of the nerve, medico-legal purpose as well. And this may also have an influence on the surgical strategy as if, for example, there is any loss in signal or anything of that sort. So intraoperative neuromonitoring is important. You can see the graph here, the compound action potential. here in a functioning nerve at 1 milliamperes, whereas here in one of the nerves where even though it is intact, at 2 milliamperes of current, it's not functioning. So that has to be documented, and the patient has to be followed up closely. So it will help you, of course, in many ways. So I'll not go into the details as to how it will help, but these are some of the tools that we use. And we are currently running a randomized trial looking at the role of intraoperative nerve monitoring at Tata Memorial Hospital. Now, the topic that we all actually initially discussed as to what we wanted to discuss was the tracheal resection anastomosis. Now, let's talk about the tracheal invasion. Now, the tracheal invasion was classified by Shin. Actually, this is a pathological classification of the tracheal involvement. It was done at the Memorial Sloan Kettering way back in the 90s. Shin 1 is when just the perichondrium is involved. It's just abutting. Shin 2 is when the perichondrium is involved and it involves the cartilage also superficially. So in Shin 1 and Shin 2, you can do a shave off, or and that should be sufficient. Shin 3 is it involves the cartilage and goes submucosally into the trachea. So when you do a fiber optic bronchoscopy, you will just see some blanching of the mucosa, some congestion of the mucosa, but not frank disease. And Shin 4 is when there is frank intraluminal disease, as you will see in our case as well. So this Shin classification is very important for us to know. Shin 1 and 2, you can do a shave off. Shin 3 and 4, you'll have to do a resection anastomosis. Now, this is the dissection anastomosis. Mostly when the trachea is involved, you either do a shave off, which we discussed for 1 and 2. Here, the other resection is window resection and a sleeve resection. Window resection meaning you just resect the one wall of the trachea that is involved, not the entire circumference of it. So the sleeve resection is otherwise known as circumferential resection as well. So here you see this is the thyroid differentiated thyroid cancer where the tracheal wall is involved. You just resect with good amount of mucosal margin there. The posterior wall here you see is intact. The anterior wall is alone. The circumference, 180 degree circumference of the trachea is resected, and that can be anastomosed here as shown here in this picture and closed primarily. Now this is a partial window resection where you just resect a small segment of it, and you can just put a muzzle graft here, or you can close it with a wedge type of resection as well. But this is a very rare situation to be in. This is a sleeve resection where you resect the entire circumference of the trachea and do the anastomosis. So we will be looking at the surgical video of this particular case. Now let me start this video. So this was an this was an this was a 48-year-old lady who presented to us with a tracheostomy already being done from outside for stridor. And she had no other comorbidities, and the core biopsy suggested a papillary thyroid carcinoma. So then we did a CT scan of this patient. This is the virtual bronchoscopy, which shows as we go through the glottis, you can see that there is an intraluminal growth there, right? And here you can see the intraluminal growth again here. Now, the surgery that was done for this patient was a total thyroidectomy, tracheal resection, central compartment clearance on the right, left side sampling was done, and the right neck dissection addressing levels 2 to 5. So the team is along with myself and Dr. Devendra Choka, my head of the department, and also we involve for tracheal dissections, we have our thoracic surgeons in place. Dr. George is a thoracic surgeon. So that was the team. So here we can see that we are trying to open up the strap muscles. Let me just orient you before I proceed. Now, this is the head end of the patient. This is the foot end, right? This is the suprasternal notch, and this is the hyoid area. So here you see the strap muscles, the sternohyoid muscle, and then we are just trying to release the sternothyroid muscle. And that's the thyroid that is coming into play. We noticed the extra thyroidal extension, and it was decided to sacrifice the strap muscles. So we are just sacrificing the strap muscles here. You can see it here. We are sacrificing the strap muscles layer by layer. Mostly the sternothyroid can be sacrificed without much consequence to the patient in terms of voice or any other function to that effect. So the sternothyroid is sacrificed. You can also sacrifice the sternohyoid muscle. It's not that you shouldn't, but sometimes in a tracheal resection anastomosis, the sternohyoid can be used to augment the anastomosis site as a second layer closure. So if you can save it, you can save it. Here the sternothyroid is being resected. So once that is done, we remove the tissue. That's internal jugular vein that is coming into view. That's the ansa cervicalis, which is going into the strap muscles that was cut. At times, you can use this nerve for the anastomosis of the nerve whenever required. So we are opening up the internal jugular vein and going to the paratracheal gutter. There you see we are opening up over the internal carotid, common carotid artery there, and opening up all the soft tissue and going down till the innominate artery there. The innominate artery is just coming into view, and we're just opening the tissue there. You can see the thymus also coming in picture. That is the thymus here. So this is the soft tissue over the, and you just go over the carotid artery, opening up the fascia layer by layer and going into the carotid gutter. And then now we are going superiorly to ligate the superior pole of the thyroid gland. So here the sternothyroid muscle can be released a bit to improve the axis. Now you must remember that the pedicle, the superior thyroid artery and vein has to be ligated independently after looking at the external branch of superior laryngeal nerve. You can see it there. We will see it better once there. That's the nerve. You will see it better once we ligate this superior pedicle. It has to be ligated individually and not together in a clump. So that will put the nerve. That is the external branch of superior laryngeal nerve that you just saw. So once the ipsilateral side resectability was confirmed, now we have gone on to the opposite side. We are raising the strap muscles, both the sternohyoid and the sternothyroid there. And then we will save all the important structures here. We'll save the nerve, the parathyroid. Now here, what you're seeing here is the parathyroid here. The opposite parathyroid we have to save, otherwise the patient will have hypocalcemia and give rise to a lot of issues in the post-op. Yeah, so so our tendency is that when we identify the parathyroids, we just apply a clip to identify it so that it can, when you do a central compartment resection, it can be preserved. That's you see the parathyroid there, that's known as the roving sign that confirms that this is the parathyroid. We put a clip and drop it down so that when you go back in to do a central compartment dissection, it will be visualized and you can keep it intact. Otherwise, it can be confused with the node and you will just dissect it out. Now that is the superior pole. You can see the external branch of superior laryngeal nerve here on this side. That is the avascular space of Reeves. And we are just dissecting the superior pedicle there, and see there you're ligating it and making sure the nerve doesn't come in your way and ligate it. That's the nerve on that side. We have saved the nerve on both sides. That's very important. Now, then we save the superior parathyroid here on this side. So both the superior and inferior parathyroid is saved. Now we identify the recurrent laryngeal nerve. You can see the recurrent laryngeal nerve there. You see this, that's the recurrent laryngeal nerve. That's the most crucial structure that needs to be saved in this entire surgery. Otherwise, the tracheal resection and anastomosis will not be possible. Then we shave it off, from the Berry's ligament area. Usually a sharp dissection is done and shaved off from the trachea. And this is, you can see the prelaryngeal node here that will be removed. So you shave it off till the area where the tracheal invasion is seen. So you narrow down to that. That's the prelaryngeal Delphian node with the pyramidal lobe that was removed. You narrow down on the area where the trachea is involved so that you can decide as to what is the segment of the trachea that is going to be removed. That's the inferior thyroid artery which is being sacrificed here. It had to be because of the gross amount of disease that is there. And this is the superior parathyroid on the disease side, on the right side that is being saved. So out of the 4 parathyroids, we could save 3. And now here we are coming on to the nerve. Now you see the nerve is thickened here and it's going into the disease. That's the metastatic node there. And you see the esophagus coming into picture, right? So we need to dissect this and take a call as to whether this can be saved. Anyway, the pre-op vocal cord function was not there. So we decided to sacrifice. Though an attempt was made just to understand as to how bad the recurrent laryngeal nerve invasion was. Now you can see here, we're just trying to do a sharp dissection here just to see if at all this nerve can be preserved. But we understood as we were doing the sharp dissection that the nerve was just lost within the disease. There's no way that anything could be meaningfully stored. So that is the esophagus here. You see this is the esophagus appearing, and the disease is also infiltrating the esophagus. So we are doing a sharp dissection again, shaving off the esophageal muscle and the constrictors, and the nerve we decided will be sacrificed. So the nerve has been sacrificed. You cannot see it here. Now we are just taking the disease off the esophagus. Now, mind you, if you enter the esophagus here, it's going to be a problem, because once the esophagus is entered, it's going to be a huge problem at your hands, which has to be dealt with. Now you can see that is the esophageal mucosa, the submucosa with the blood vessel that is seen there. Oops, sorry. So as you can see the esophageal mucosa there. Once you open that up, then it has to be closed very carefully. There you go. That's the esophageal mucosa. You have to be carefully dissecting it off. Then at the entry point, in the tracheostomy done was a low tracheostomy below the mass. So we just entered at the entry point where the tracheostomy was done, so that if the margins had to be revised, we could do it later. But there's no point doing a margin blindly, because you need that much of trachea to close as well. You have to be oncologically safe. At the same time, try to save the amount of trachea that you can oncologically save. So that was, we sent for frozen the mucosa on this part of the trachea, confirmed it is negative, and before the anastomosis. Now we have, and put the tube back in. Now we do a sharp dissection, keeping the opposite recurrent laryngeal nerve under direct vision. Otherwise, as you all know, it will be a futile exercise that we're going to attempt right now if we don't save it. So slowly but surely, we are just releasing the trachea off the esophagus. Slowly here. And then and this is the party wall between the trachea and the esophagus that you usually would remove in a laryngectomy. Now this is involving the esophagus as well. If this esophagus is infiltrated fully here through and through with an intraluminal disease, then it has to be a total it's you have to remove this segment of the pharynx and probably do a free jejunum. But then we took a consent for a total laryngectomy and all of this, and then proceeded with this patient. You see the disease is still infiltrating the esophagus. So we are going one layer at a time. So once you see the disease, you go below that. You see a disease, you go below that till a point where you actually will have to enter. So we could avoid entry into the esophagus. We slowly shaved off the disease from the esophagus, just keeping the mucosa intact. So that should serve our purpose. Slowly but surely. Now, once that shave off was done, so we decided that much of trachea will be resected, and we entered the trachea looking at the disease. This was more of a proliferative disease than infiltrative into the lumen. So we saw that, and we removed the disease and took a mucosal cut within the trachea. You can always revise the tracheal margins once you have the specimen in hand. You can remove a few more rings rather than removing too many extra rings, which will make the anastomosis more complex. That's with the margin, you're just removing the mucosa there posteriorly. That's the sleeve resection. So it's gently shaved off slowly with a lot of suctioning and saline infiltration that is slowly removed. And the disease is out. And once that is out, then we sent the 2 cut ends for frozen and confirmed it is negative. And then thoracic surgeons came. Oops, sorry. I'm sorry, just a minute. Yeah, so this is a very important slide I wanted to show here. So thoracic surgeons did the tracheal release that you just will be seeing in some time here. So that's the tracheal release that is being done. You can go all the way up to the carina or to the arch with this. You can release the trachea. With that, you will get a release of up to 1.5 to 2 centimeters. This is very important to understand because the blood supply to the trachea comes from here laterally. So you need to dissect only in the posterior aspect and not laterally. That will devascularize the trachea and give rise to a lot of problem. So that is very, very important to understand. The next thing is with the neck flexion itself, you can get up to 15 to 4.5 centimeters of the trachea that is released. And this, what we're doing is the Montgomery suprahyoid release. I think all of you know because all of you do tracheal resection anastomosis. So the same procedure that we do. This is the common thing: neck flexion and suprahyoid release with the tracheal release inferiorly. So with this, you can achieve up to 6 centimeters easily of tracheal release, and the anastomosis can be closed without tension. So you just release the suprahyoid muscles till the lesser horn of the hyoid and nothing beyond that. That's the lesser horn there on that side. You don't go on either side because you could damage the superior laryngeal nerve, and also the lingual artery is on either side. So you wouldn't want to damage any of that right now. So this release, you've got the larynx moving down. That should be sufficient. Now we do the anastomosis. So first, the posterior wall is sutures are taken. The sutures are taken along the entire posterior wall, and then the knot is placed. In between, you have to remember to keep ventilating the patient. And you take all the sutures, and then you tie one knot at a time. And then once all the posterior knots are being done, then you come back to the anterior surface. So the knot placing is very, very important. So the posterior wall is closed. Intermittently, you'll have to keep ventilating the patient. So the knots are being placed, and then now you come to the anterior wall. Now it's very important, before you take the anterior wall, the tube has to go across the anastomosis. That is very, very important. And it is also important to make sure that the cuff of the endotracheal tube is beyond the area of the anastomosis. Otherwise, when the endotracheal tube pressure falls on the anastomosis, that can give rise to dehiscence. You can see the endotracheal tube with the cuff beyond the anastomosis site. So that's very important. At this point, push the tube at that particular point beyond the anastomosis, and then take the suture. You can see the recurrent laryngeal nerve in view all the time, and make sure it doesn't come into any of your knots or suture that you're taking. You can see the parathyroid that is nice and vascular out here as well. So all these things are very important for the patient to recover in the post-op smoothly, that is. And the knots have to be put very properly, that it should not be loose, otherwise there could be dehiscence. So all the knots are being placed one at a time, very carefully. So this is nothing new. It's the same procedure that you would do for a tracheal stenosis and anastomosis. The only bit is the how much of structures that you like to remove. So that is different in case of malignancy. So that needs to be taken care of. And you should make sure that the cartilage don't override and they just approximate well. So once the sutures are done, then we just put in some amount of saline and do a Valsalva maneuver to just check if there's any leak. There was none, as you can see in this. And once that is done, then we usually, in this case, you can see the recurrent laryngeal nerve in its entirety. It's all intact. In this case, we put the fibrin glue, but it's not always necessary. And then we close. This was a tall cell variant of papillary CA, high risk. She received radioactive iodine. You can see the cord on the saved side that is functioning, the fiber optic scopy in the subsequent post-op period. And she received external beam radiotherapy. And at present, she's been weaned off the tracheostomy, the Ryle's tube, and she's taking orally. And this is the virtual bronchoscopy again. After the few months after the surgery, you can see the entire trachea is normal and the airway seems to be good enough. It's up to the carina here. And it's pretty okay. And this patient is under control. The TSS is suppressed. And I'd like to acknowledge all the people who helped put this video together. Let's proceed with this talk further. Now, the thing is that the post-operative complications could be mostly the anastomotic dehiscence that manifests itself as subcutaneous emphysema, and cord palsy, which could be a devastation, and bleeding as well. So in this case, it went off without much of these problems, but we have had issues. So as a protocol, after the tracheal resection, what we do is, once the patient is shifted, we do a chest X-ray of the patient to see if the endotracheal tube is not, because you have resected the segment of the trachea and you kept keeping the neck in flexion. You also take what is known as the guardian stitch in the between the submentum to the manubrium. So by mistake, you can probably be ventilating one lung instead of two. That could give rise to a lot of problems. So you do a chest X-ray as per protocol immediately once the patient is being shifted. Morbidity and mortality has been described even up to 15%, but of late, the morbidity rates are less. So esophageal involvement is another thing, as we already saw in the case that the video that you saw, that till the submucosa you can just shave off, and once you open up the mucosa, you need to see. If it's a small opening, you can try to close it primarily, but if it's an extensive defect, it has to be closed with some flap, either a myofascial flap or a myocutaneous free flap or a pedicle flap. Now, once you open up the esophagus, you have to keep this patient under close follow-up, because it's going to be a very stormy post-op, so to say. If there is a leak, the carotid is just in the vicinity, the internal jugular vein is there could be a blowout. So you have to take all precautions to avoid that. Laryngeal involvement, as I already said, it's a partial thickness involvement most of the time, and shave off should be good enough. Gross endolaryngeal invasion is very rare, and most of the time you'll end up doing a partial laryngectomy than a total laryngectomy. Vascular involvement most commonly is the IJV. If one IJV can be easily sacrificed without any problems, but sometimes in follicular carcinoma thyroid, that has a tendency to throw up thrombi. You see this thrombi going into the internal jugular vein here. So that thrombectomy has to be done, and you can repair this internal jugular vein. So that is one thing that you need to take care of. Internal carotid artery, the common carotid artery, usually you don't have to sacrifice. Most of the time, shave off is good enough. Nodal disease is the other thing that you need to keep in mind. This is one of our cases wherein you can see the number of nodes that were there. The entire neck mediastinum was studded with nodes. Now here you can see that is the innominate artery. You can see the subclavian artery. We had to do a stenotomy here for the mediastinal nodal clearance. That is the subclavian artery. And you can see the recurrent laryngeal nerve making a loop around the subclavian artery and going up. You see, that is the recurrent laryngeal nerve. Let me just take away this. Now you can see this loop here. That is the vagus, and then the recurrent laryngeal nerve is going around the subclavian artery here. That's the recurrent laryngeal, that's the vagus, and then the recurrent laryngeal nerve is going up. And that is the brachiocephalic vein. So the disease was encasing the brachiocephalic vein as well. You can see this is the PET scan image with a gross amount of disease. We didn't have to do a tracheal dissection here, but then mediastinum had to be open. That's the brachiocephalic vein and the arch of aorta here. So we had to do a stenotomy up front to get this disease out. And sometimes when there is a lot of nodal disease, you can also have a retropharyngeal node, which will have to be removed during the surgery itself. Now, once you do all this surgery, it has to be supplemented with adjuvant therapy for a better outcome. Radioactive iodine therapy, usually for this sitting, it's about 150 to 200 millicuries that are given. With distant metastasis, it can be given to more than one cycle as well. Up to the cumulative dose could be up to 1 curie maximum that can be given. So up to 5 settings can be given. And the TSH has to be suppressed. That's very important. The L-toxin doses are kept up to 150 to 200 micrograms is given daily to keep the TSH under suppression to prevent recurrence. And in high-grade histology, and in case that you saw here where we had to shave off and microscopic disease is probably left behind, you can also add up external beam radiotherapy, in which case you give 60 grays of radiotherapy. And prognosis in these patients is not bad at all. When you get even an R1 resection, like in our case, the 5-year survival is up to 87%. So you're looking at a good survival. So locally advanced differentiated thyroid cancer, when treated appropriately, do well in terms of survival with an acceptable quality of life. I'd like to thank you for the patient listening, and I'd like to invite you for OncoSurge, which is one of our annual surgical workshop. This time it's virtual for the same reason of COVID pandemic, and there'll be a lot of surgeries of the different subsites, including head and neck. Please mark the dates of between 11 to 13 December. It's a virtual conference, and you can all join us there. Thank you for the patient listening. I can take questions from here on.
Thank you, Dr. Shivakumar. I think it was a wonderful lecture. You had very few cases like this, and it was enlightening to see you operate in these patients and do tracheal resection and anastomosis as well. I would like to invite the participants for any questions that they want.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for the enlightening lecture on an unusual topic, which you have made us to understand and took us with you in that surgical video. It was in a very HD quality and was very clear, as if we were standing by the side and watching you. Maybe the person who are in the theater may not be able to see this much clearly. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah.
There are a few questions coming up. I would request the audience to post the question, which is just below the video, and they can type in the question there. And Dr. Kavita from Tanjavur is asking, what are the indications for tracheal resection? She wants to clear some questions you might have already answered in the lecture. There may be some repetitions.
Absolutely. We can take that question. No issue. So in a differentiated thyroid cancer, where you can get an R0 resection, or at the worst case scenario being an R1 resection, meaning a microscopic residual disease that is left behind, nothing grossly left behind in a differentiated thyroid cancer. If it is a differentiated thyroid cancer, meaning papillary thyroid cancer, follicular thyroid cancer, and Hürthle cell carcinoma, we have to understand that the papillary thyroid cancer is the most common cancer. 85% of them are papillary thyroid cancer. Now, medullary thyroid cancer, where you end up doing a tracheal resection, is going to be very less common situation, because this patient will have such an extensive disease that even in medullary thyroid cancer with distant metastasis, you would not end up doing this tracheal resection anastomosis. So to sum up, what I would say is most often you would do a tracheal resection anastomosis when there is an intraluminal growth of the thyroid cancer in a differentiated thyroid cancer. That would be the situation where you would do this surgery. And at least one recurrent laryngeal nerve should be functioning. Both is great, but at least one recurrent laryngeal nerve should be functioning, and the esophagus should not be involved. If the esophagus is involved, then you cannot do a resection anastomosis. It probably will end up in a total laryngectomy that you would do. But that situation is very rare to be in.
That's what exactly the next question is. When should we do a total laryngectomy?
So if, for example, we are not able to save both the recurrent laryngeal nerve, then that's the situation where you have to consider a total laryngectomy. Second is when you have damaged the esophagus beyond repair, then it is not safe to do a tracheal resection anastomosis, because you have an esophageal anastomosis that is not good, and you have a tracheal anastomosis. The airway is also at risk, and the vessels, the vascular structures in the neck are also at risk. So it is better to do a total laryngectomy, get the airway out under control, cover the vessels with some vascularized tissue. So in that situation, probably you do a total laryngectomy.
So when should we do a jejunal interposition?
So in this particular case itself, if, for example, even if we could save the recurrent laryngeal nerve, if the esophagus had to be, if it was the intraluminal growth of the esophagus, so we have to resect that segment of the esophagus and the pharynx and do a free jejunum in that particular case. Gastric pull-up is usually avoided in these cases. Previously, we used to do a gastric pull-up, but that's too morbid a surgery. For a patient with a differentiated thyroid cancer, you can do a shave off very well. If that is not possible, you should always try to do a free jejunum rather than a gastric pull-up.
So you said about recurrent laryngeal nerve reanastomosis or reinnervation.
Yeah.
So what is the nerve which is being used to interpose or end-to-end anastomosis?
So we can do the ansa cervicalis is the best nerve that is used most of the time for the anastomosis. Which I already mentioned, Miyoshi from Kumo Hospital in Japan, they had published a series. So they had used the ansa cervicalis most of the time. We have done it in a couple of cases, but most of the time, the cases that we see, the disease involves at the entry point itself. So we don't have the distal stem as it enters the larynx. So what they have described is, even when you don't have a distal stem, what they do is they resect the inferior constrictor muscle, trace the nerve as it goes into the larynx, and anastomose it as high as there, and they claim to have good results. So what I'm trying to say here is, when you have to sacrifice a segment of the nerve, then you can use the ansa cervicalis, or if possible, do an end-to-end anastomosis whenever possible. So I think the American Head and Neck Society consensus statement also says that whenever possible, we'll have to do a reinnervation at the same sitting. Previously, we used to think even if you sacrifice, we can do a thyroplasty at a later point. But now the thinking has evolved in that we try to do a reinnervation, because that reinnervation helps to maintain the tone of the laryngeal musculature. In other words, the phonatory gap is minimized and the phonation time is also maximized. And if that doesn't work, then we can consider thyroplasty at a later date.
Okay. For reinnervation, the other side should be intact, or both sides we can do?
No, one nerve has to be intact. One nerve has to be intact.
Otherwise, total laryngectomy is the option.
Yes.
Okay. Is there any condition where we will not be able to do reinnervation, or we should not do reinnervation, or any particular malignant condition? So,
if, for example, it's a medullary thyroid carcinoma, you will have to sacrifice the nerve, because unlike differentiated thyroid cancer, adjuvant therapy for medullary thyroid cancer is only radiotherapy, if at all. The medullary thyroid carcinoma doesn't take up radioactive iodine. So there's no point leaving behind disease in the central compartment. So in that case, you'll have to sacrifice. Anaplastic thyroid carcinoma, the situation where the nerve is involved and you can save from the larynx and trachea is very uncommon, but that is another situation, if at all that happens, you cannot do the anastomosis. So mostly, again, it's in the differentiated thyroid cancer that you'll end up doing it.
Dr. Sambandam sir, he's asking thyroid CA producing trachea with multiple invasion or a scabbard trachea. So what is
the tracheomalacia, I think, is what sir is referring to. The tracheomalacia is more of a myth. I think we have, many of you also might have seen that long-standing trachea also, when you resect, it is compressed. It may be not as rigid as most of the trachea that you normally would encounter, but I at least have not seen, a tracheomalatic. It's totally, collapsible trachea, so to say. Probably it will be seen in a pediatric age group, but most of the adults, what happens is the trachea tends to calcify, and the chances of the tracheomalatic segment of a trachea is almost very, very rare. It's a theoretical possibility, but does not happen routinely. So if you suspect, what we do is that we keep the endotracheal tube overnight and extubate them slowly the next day around. So that's the precaution we would take, nothing more.
So what's the role of cardiothoracic surgeon other than releasing the trachea?
The cardiothoracic surgeon, of course, is going to do the sternotomy for us, and he is going to help us dissect from the structures, from the aorta, arch of aorta, and the brachiocephalic vein. What happens is, in one of the cases that we showed where the sternotomy was done, the brachiocephalic vein was involved. So we also involve the vascular surgeons in that case, where they do the resection of the brachiocephalic vein and put an anastomosis. So, and many times there will be a thrombus which will be going down all the way into the atrium as well. So the vascular surgeon will help us retrieve the thrombus out slowly so that it doesn't get dislodged into the system and cause a vascular event.
Okay, in case of esophageal resection, should we keep them on a Ryle's tube, nasogastric tube, or we should go for a feeding gastroscopy?
So what we do is, in locally advanced, in most of our thyroid cancers, where we suspect any invasion, we always put a Ryle's tube up front. After intubation, we put a Ryle's tube because that helps us identify the esophagus also. So as we are shaving off from the esophagus, we just keep palpating the Ryle's tube as to where the position of the Ryle's tube is. That gives us an indication as to how close we are into the lumen of the esophagus. So we always put a Ryle's tube and we feed the patient with the Ryle's tube. So we don't do a PEG or a feeding jejunostomy. That's not done.
Fine. So there are a couple of questions about secondaries. Dr. Ganesh, sir, is asking if there are any secondaries. How do you proceed further?
Secondaries meaning I didn't understand.
Neck secondaries, I think.
Okay, neck nodes.
Neck
So in this case again, so we do a neck dissection. The central compartment clearance was done as you saw in the video. So all the nodes were removed with the nerve. And we do, whenever the central compartment node is positive, we also address the lateral compartment because the chances of lateral metastasis is maximum when the central compartment is positive. So we do a level 2 to 5. In this case, the lateral also was positive. So in one of the cases that we showed the pictures of bilateral neck and mediastinum and all that, we have to do bilateral neck as well. And sometimes retropharyngeal and parapharyngeal node also can be there. So that is why when a CT scan is done for a locally advanced thyroid cancer, you'll have to look for all the locoregional structures that are involved. And apart from that, you'll also have to look if there is nodal disease in the parapharyngeal space and in the retropharyngeal space as well, especially when there are multiple nodes. So that has to be preoperatively looked at, mapped out, and you have to plan the surgical approach. So you'll have to do a bilateral neck dissection if required, as was done in one of those cases.
So in case, yes.
Sorry, and the mediastinal clearance as well. So you have to do a sternotomy and do a mediastinal clearance as well.
In case if we get a recurrence after 1 or 2 years, especially in a posterior triangle lymph node or something like that, and if it is going to be a papillary CA,
surgery definitely. Whenever if it's a differentiated thyroid cancer, they come back with recurrence, we'll have to again, whenever operable, we'll have to go in for the surgery. So, and we'll have to just plan the surgery well so that we can keep the surgery least morbid for the patient. That is all. So it has to be planned well, but if operable, it has to be addressed always.
There is always a question and a thought. How come parathyroids are not getting involved in these kind of scenarios, and we are preserving the parathyroids, we are trying to preserve the parathyroids, and how it is not getting involved in this?
So parathyroid that way is very resistant. It is resistant to radiotherapy as well. Now, one interesting fact is most of the head and neck squamous cell carcinoma end up receiving radiotherapy. Now, all patients who receive radiotherapy, they become hypothyroid in a matter of 6 months' time. But you don't see a situation where the patient becomes hypoparathyroid.
Yeah.
The patient never develops hypoparathyroidism following radiotherapy to the neck. That is never a case. So probably it's the nature of the parathyroid or the way it is, embryologically developed, that it is resistant to probably the invasion by the tumor as well, and also high dose radiotherapy of even up to 70 grays when you give. Even when you re-irradiate patient, when you irradiate the patient the second time as well, none of the patients develop hypoparathyroidism, whereas hypothyroidism is always a problem. Within 6 months, they will develop hypothyroidism.
Thanks, sir. And there is a question about how long we should follow up the patient with radioactive iodine.
So the follow-up is usually at 6 monthly interval. To begin with, at 3 monthly interval, and then the second year onwards, you can keep 6 monthly interval. Now, at every follow-up, what you need to essentially do, these patients, you must understand, have to be in suppressive TSH suppression, meaning to say they have to be on high dose L-toxin therapy. Because whatever microscopic follicular cells that will be left behind, if there is a constant TSH stimulation, they will grow. That will cause recurrence. So you'll have to suppress the TSH. So you have to keep the L-toxin T4 high. So we keep we give up to 150 to 200 micrograms. Now there is the American Thyroid Association risk stratification. They are stratified into low, intermediate, and high risk. So if the patient is in high risk patient, like all the locally advanced thyroid cancer are high risk patients, the TSH should be kept less than 0.01. That is the recommended TSH level. So the patient will always be under high T4 dose for the lifetime, at least for the first 5 years. And the other thing that you'll check for TSH, you'll check for serum calcium, and you'll check for serum thyroglobulin, because after radioactive iodine and all is given, any small amount of thyroglobulin that is there will be shown, and then that will probably indicate a recurrence. So these are the things that you will follow up the patient with, and depending upon the findings and clinical situation, you will do a imaging. Imaging is not always done.
Exactly, that's what. Is there any role for PET scan in the follow-up?
PET scan, mostly iodine scan may be done as long as the patient still retains a differentiated thyroid cancer. But sometimes over the period of years, the differentiated thyroid cancer can undergo a de-differentiation, so to say. So they may become a poorly differentiated thyroid cancer, in which case that's when there is a role for PET scan. The other role for PET scan is when we have what is known as the Tennis syndrome. Tennis syndrome is known as thyroglobulin elevation with negative iodine scan. You do in a routine checkup, a patient will come to you. You have done a thyroglobulin. Thyroglobulin is high. Let's say 60. It should be less than 2. It's 60. But when you do an iodine scan, there's nothing that is taking up in the neck. So that means that patient probably is having a Tennis syndrome. So you'll do a PET scan in that case. So for iodine, for radioactive iodine to be taken up by a thyroid gland, you need what is known as a sodium iodine symporter. Now, as long as the thyroid is differentiated, this sodium iodine symporter will be there. Once the de-differentiation takes place, you will get the GLUT1 symporters, which is for the squamous cell carcinomas and other poorly differentiated cancers. So they will start showing up in the PET scan, but they will not show up in the iodine scan. So that's when the PET scan is also very useful.
Thanks. So, any other question, sir?
Do you do thyroglobulin studies immediately after the...
So, sir, thyroglobulin usually has a nadir of 4 weeks. So we don't do a thyroglobulin until after 4 weeks from surgery. So we check after 4 weeks. That is the baseline. And then that will be kept as the baseline. And then subsequently at 3 or 6 monthly interval, it can be checked.
What are the parameters, or what are the investigations you do for recurrence?
So for recurrence, sir, mostly thyroglobulin is good enough, and TSH we do, and serum calcium we do. So whenever the thyroglobulin is elevated, the other thing I forgot to mention is whenever you do a serum thyroglobulin, you do what is known as the anti-thyroglobulin antibody. So many of the times this antibody may be there in the patients, and if you do a serum thyroglobulin, it can reflect low, but in the presence of antithyroid antiglobulin, that may not be the right picture. So when it is normal and when the thyroglobulin is elevated, that shows there is probably a recurrence, and you will do an imaging in those particular situations. And imaging would be a CT neck thorax, or a PET scan, or a thyroid scan will just tell you that there is some recurrence, but it will not give you a morphological detail.
Video you showed a tissue glue being used. What was it for, sir?
So just to make sure the anastomosis, holds well, but it's not always necessary. In that particular case, we somehow used it, the fibrin glue, TISL that we use, but not always necessary. I wouldn't recommend in routine cases, but in this case, we just happen to use it.
What anastomosis, sir? What anastomosis?
The tracheal anastomosis, that is.
Tracheal.
Okay.
Dr. Ramaniraj sir wants to know what's the post-op complication rate and what are the common things?
So the most common complication is subcutaneous emphysema. If it is not too, extensive, going into the mediastinum, going all the way up to the zygoma, then it can be managed conservatively. If it is so much so, if it's extensive emphysema, then you'll have to probably take in, re-explore the patient and see whether the anastomotic site is dehiscent, and that has to be taken care of. And the other thing is, as I already mentioned, the endotracheal tube that you put shouldn't be ventilating one side of the lung. So that will cause collapse of the opposite side of the lung and could give rise to a pneumonia, and it's a vicious cycle, and you can lose the patient. The other complications are you can have a chyle leak, that's another complication that you would probably end up having. Hemorrhage, if any of the blood vessels just open up, whatever you clipped or ligated. And mortality eventually happens because of one of these complications, mostly the lung-related issues. So in the first 24 to 48 hours, you need to make sure that the patient does not go into that particular vicious cycle. And if the patient comes out of it, mostly they'll be through that. And nowadays, the mortality rate is are less than 5% for tracheal resection.
Great. So Dr. Samadhan sir wants to discuss about tumor markers.
So tumor marker for a differentiated thyroid cancer is thyroglobulin. Now, when you're talking about medullary thyroid cancer, it is calcitonin that we would look at. So for differentiated thyroid cancer, thyroglobulin is good enough. Now, there is a understanding that poorly differentiated thyroid cancer do not secrete thyroglobulin. But that again is sort of a myth. We have published one study where we looked at poorly differentiated thyroid cancer, and most of our poorly differentiated thyroid cancer patients were secreting thyroglobulin. So even in poorly differentiated thyroid cancer, you can monitor these patients with thyroglobulin itself for if it is a follicular or a papillary which is de-differentiated into a poorly differentiated thyroid cancer.
Thanks, sir. And when we are doing a tracheal resection, what should be the margin we are looking at? And if we are sending for a frozen section and if it again comes positive, how much we should give?
So up to 5 to 7 tracheal rings we can resect and anastomose with all the laryngeal release and tracheal release maneuvers. Sometimes the tracheal release maneuvers, you can go into the pericardium and release all the pulmonary ligaments around the pericardium and get a good amount of release. With the various maneuvers, the flexion of the neck, the laryngeal drop, the tracheal, the pre-tracheal dissection, and the release of the mediastinal ligaments, you can get a good amount of 6 to 8 centimeters of the release. That should be enough. So with that, a maximum of 5 to 7 tracheal rings can be easily resected and anastomosis with minimal tension at the anastomotic site. The other thing is there is something that is known as the Guardian stitch or the Grillo stitch that is popularly known as. You take a stitch from the submentum to the mandibulosternal joint. That could be taken. That could help ease the tension at the anastomotic site. But sometimes what we do is we don't want to take that stitch. You can do the soft collar in the reverse fashion. So that also helps you in keeping the neck flexed. That is another option. And frozen section, if like, for example, in oral cavity, you have 5 millimeters margin. Now for thyroid cancer in this situation, we really don't know what the right answer is. What we want is, we just want a negative margin at the anastomotic site. Now it can be 2 mm, it can be 4 mm, but it should be negative. That is all, because it's a very crucial site and you don't want a 1 centimeter margin there, because you're going to lose that much amount of tracheal ring to do the crucial anastomosis. And the other thing is you also have a good adjuvant therapy at hand, which will take care of. But we have to be very careful. Now that good adjuvant therapy should not be used as an excuse for an R+ resection. So that is the downside to it, but it has to be a very guarded call that you need to take during the surgery.
Exactly. So Dr. Ganesh sir wants to know, when will you do the frozen section? Exactly, that's what we have discussed.
Frozen section, like for example, while we're doing the release maneuvers, we will take the 2 cut end of the trachea, a sliver of tissue. The cartilage cannot be processed in frozen section. So what this process is the intercartilaginous membrane. So you just take one cartilage ring, a cartilage, and then the intercartilaginous membrane is sent for frozen. And if there is no disease that is reported, we just stop there. So you can resect as close to the disease as possible and then go resecting the rings one at a time further. so that you have maximum amount of rings that is left behind for anastomosis, rather than going at first shot, taking too many rings out, then it's going to be a problem. So it has to be very guarded approach.
Anything on esophagus when we resect, sir, frozen section?
No, esophagus we wouldn't do anything. Only thing is that if you open up the esophagus, if there's an intraluminal growth, then you would probably want to, when you're resecting the esophagus, then you'll send the ends of the esophagus and the pharynx for margins. That is it.
On recurrent laryngeal nerve, should be able to...
Recurrent laryngeal nerve, if you're resecting a segment of recurrent laryngeal nerve, let's say, you just want to resect a segment and use the other end for anastomosis. In that case, we will send in the specimen itself, you'll mark the ink on the resected segment and see if that segment is free of disease. In which case, you can do the end-to-end anastomosis.
Fine, sir. Dr. Samadhan sir wants to know flap surgery for tracheal resection.
Flap. Meaning to say, when you do a window resection, that is when you just remove the anterior wall of the trachea, like what we saw in one of the cases, it was a partial window resection. Then you can put part of the sternocleidomastoid or the strap muscles and suture that particular window. That is the flap that you use. And it's also recommended in various local skin flaps, also in staged procedures. They can suture the anterior defects only, not for the entire circumferential defect. And if the esophagus is resected, as we already discussed, it's the free jejunum that we do. Yeah, gastric polyp is mostly avoided nowadays, as much as possible.
So any other questions, sir?
So have you used a transesophageal ultrasonography, sir?
Yes, sir. So we nowadays routinely do it, as I mentioned in the workup, when we have to do an upper GI endoscopy. So our medical gastroenterology team does an esophageal ultrasound. So that is another way where we try to assess as to how much of esophageal involvement is there. Apart from doing an MRI, which is the best method to identify esophageal muscular involvement, we also do the endoscopic ultrasound via an upper GI endoscopy.
Sir, wants to know when should we ask the patient to get core needle biopsy done?
Hello.
Fine, sir. Like for example, if the anaplastic thyroid carcinoma that we saw.
Optic laser.
Now, one of the differential diagnoses for the anaplastic thyroid carcinoma is a lymphoma, I said. So we had a situation, we had a patient where presented with a spider. We had to do a tracheostomy. And during the tracheostomy itself, we had to go through the disease to reach the trachea. So we sent it for frozen and they said it is lymphoma. It was lucky for the patient, it was lymphoma. We could secure the airway. We started the CHOP regime for the patient and it just melted and we decannulated the patient and sent the patient home. So when you're suspecting a lymphoma or when you're not able to come to a conclusive diagnosis is when you need to do a core biopsy. Otherwise, if an FNA can tell you it is papillary or anaplastic, that should be enough. If FNA does not throw good light or if FNA says it could be a possibility of a lymphoma is when you need to do a core needle biopsy.
I think we are coming to the end of this session. Any other questions? Otherwise, we can. There are a lot of questions coming up. I think we are 11:25. We may have to proceed for GBM in another 5 minutes.
Yeah, no issues.
Sir, Shankar sir, you may have to unmute, sir.
Professor Ravi Kumar from SRM said now is in SRM. He wants to ask a question, but he is not able to connect, I believe. He called me just now.
Sure.
He wants to know about he has come. Sir, you can talk, sir. Sir, Ravi Kumar, sir.
So Shankar sir, I would request you to share the Zoom link with the...
I've already shared.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
I think from that. Sir, please ask Dr. Shivakumar. He is Dr. Ravi Kumar. He was ex-head of the... And
hi, sir. Good morning.
Now he is the Pro-Vice Chancellor of SRM University.
Oh, great.
I listened to your lecture and it was wonderful.
Thank you, sir.
And I'm really happy that the ENT person has gone and started doing all these things.
Thank you, sir.
When I started doing tracheal dissections in 2008, it was always a practice to use a guardian knot.
Yeah.
Then and keep them like that for about a week or so.
Yeah.
Of late, we don't do it anymore. Of course, I have not done many malignancies like you have done, but I must admire the surgical skill that you have to do this. But we have dealt with a lot of tracheal stenosis and subglottic stenosis cases. I think totally about 95 odd cases we have done, of which nearly 40 were tracheal stenosis alone, 40 or 50, I'm not sure the number. And we have published and also been awarded anytime. My basic doubt is this. There are two issues which I thought was important in our success. I just wanted to be clarified from your side. One is, I'm talking purely in case of tracheal stenosis.
Yeah.
I do not keep the patient intubated post-operatively.
Yeah.
Because I felt that the tube is irritant, and that causes the failure in the anastomotic site.
Yeah.
Secondly, the stitching which we used 3-0 Vicryl, and we placed the knots outside the tracheal lumen. So the third question is the flexion of the neck, which we are all been taught so many times.
Yeah.
We have only done away with it, and we just keep a pillow and a head ring on it, keep the patient more immobilized, and keep 2 pillows on the side. The pillows are the rolls of tightly bound rolls of some cloth or bed sheet. That seems to suffice for us. I want you to comment on all the 3 aspects which I told you.
Yeah. Yes, sir. And so coming to the first question as to intubation. So the thing is that most of the tracheal dissections that we end up doing, we have to do a bilateral neck dissection and the sternotomy and the mediastinal clearance. So the case goes on from morning to 6 or 7 in the evening. So we don't want to extubate the patient at that point in time, late in the evening hours, because most of the time casualties happen at that particular point. So we prefer to keep the patient intubated overnight, and we extubate the next day morning, because that is better, because after having undergone such a major surgery, extubating the patient also may not, is what our protocol is, that we extubate the patient overnight because of the long duration of surgery that the patient has undergone. And
how about non-invasive ventilation instead of just keeping the tube in? Because at the time of extubation, the patient is not fully sedated now in our setup.
Patient is not paralyzed. The patient is reversed. The patient is not kept paralyzed. He's just put on ventilator support, maybe a CPAP. And once he's out of the anesthesia, he's just put on oxygen support, nothing else. Patient is not paralyzed. And then the next day, if required, if the patient is agitated, we would paralyze the patient. Otherwise, no, not always. And the next day morning, first thing is we would extubate the patient. We would not do a routine fiber optic bronchoscopy as some of the groups would do. So we would not routinely do that. So that is the protocol that we have been following, which has been working well for us. The other thing is that for the suture material that we used is a PDS. We had used a 3-0 PDS. And for the inner layer, the knots would go on the outer edge, the inside out technique. And so the knots all will be on the outside only, not on the intraluminal aspect. That is one thing. And the third thing is that about the flexion, we use the Guardian stitch, but our thoracic surgeons are very unhappy with us using the Guardian stitch. They somehow don't dislike it, and many of our head and neck surgeons also do. So we give the soft collar in the reverse direction, which helps us keeping the neck in flexion. And of course, as you said, in the post-op, the patient can be, nursed in the neck flexion position. We do that as well.
The only thing I have is about the extubation part. Because I had 2 disasters in the extubation time, and it was a little rough, done by a junior intensivist in the ICU. Maybe we don't have the technical expertise which you have in your institution there. Yes.
I must admit that our intensivists are absolutely good. So we are confident in keeping the tube overnight because they are confident. Otherwise, we wouldn't.
Because when they pull out the tube, they do it in such a way that the cuff actually rubs against our suture line. And at that time, the damage takes place. Granulations start appearing, and slowly it starts giving way.
Yes.
So I salvaged them, of course, but then after that, I convinced my anesthetist that they should not be keeping the tube in. And we do the extubation either in the OT or in the immediate post-op recovery room. And watch the patient for 4 to 6 minutes in the post-op recovery room. Then shift them to the ICU. And at that point of time, one of my residents is always on duty in the night time, so that they are closely monitored. This has been my take home from this procedure. It's a very challenging procedure.
Absolutely.
It's one of the things which I really used to take credit for, because we have excellent videos of post-operative patients performing exercises, running, all those things. And we can do a lot to these young people who will suffer from tracheal stenosis. Of course, malignancy is a different ballgame altogether. And I must congratulate you for being so brave and so very competent in doing these surgeries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. With this, we will conclude this session. I would request Eman Shankar sir to proceed with the IBM.
Thank you, Professor Shivakumar. I think it was a wonderful lecture. You have had so many questions, so that itself shows that you have enlightened the minds of so many people. So a lot of people who have been asking questions were the ones who were doing. So I think you should be happy now that your words have been really helping a lot of people. Have you had any stenosis post-operatively, or?
No, sir, not after tracheal resection anastomosis. One patient, yes, we did have, but then that was a tracheal tumor per se. It was not a CA thyroid. Yes, we had a isolated case of stenosis subsequently, which we had to redo.
Okay. Anyhow, thank you very much for having joined us for this virtual meet. It was indeed a pleasure for the members here, and I thank you on behalf of the members of the Association of Otolaryngologists Chennai branch. It is one of the oldest branch, and I would say that some of the people the professors of Madras Medical College were the ones who started off Association of Otolaryngologists of India. If you would recollect Professor Cherian,
yes, sir,
from Madras Medical College.
Yes, sir.
Professor Rajendra Kumar has just joined.
Yes, sir.
Anyhow, thank you very much.
I'm thankful to you also for having me here. So Chennai is my native place, so I'm very happy, addressing you all, and it's indeed a pleasure and honor for me. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Now we'll proceed with the GBM, but